Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into something that's been making headlines non-stop. The escalating trade tensions between the US, Canada and China under President Trump's tariff campaign. It's a complex web of negotiations, leverages and strategies that could reshape North American and global economies for years to come. I'll break it down step by step, chatting through the key points like we're just hanging out over coffee, but with all the facts backed up. First off, let's set the stage. Canada has been a tough nut to crack in trade dealings with the US for years now. Think about it. We've got this massive neighbor to the north that's been integral to our supply chains, but President Trump has been vocal about rethinking that dependency. He said things like, "We don't need them to make our cars, and they make a lot of them." And it's true, Canada produces a ton of vehicles that end up in the US market. But Trump points out we have our own manufacturing capabilities. Same goes for lumber. We don't need their lumber because we have our own forests, etc., etc. The US has vast timber resources, so why rely so heavily on imports? And oil and gas. We don't need their oil and gas. We have more than anybody. That's a bold claim, but the US has ramped up its own production through fracking and other methods, making it one of the top energy producers globally. But here's where it gets interesting, and a bit confusing. Trump has admitted, "I'm being honest, like no one knows what he wants, including elected officials down here." Wait, who is he? It seems like a slip, but in context it's probably referring to the ambiguity in trade goals, even among US policymakers. It's like everyone's guessing what the end game is. This uncertainty has fueled the tariff escalations we're seeing. Back in early August, things heated up big time. Donald Trump cranked up his tariff campaign and Canada got slapped with a 35% duty on non-USMCA goods. For those unfamiliar, USMCA is the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the revamped NAFTA that sets rules for tariff-free trade in certain categories. So anything outside those rules? Boom. 35% tariff. Meanwhile, other countries like the EU, Japan, and South Korea negotiated lower caps in exchange for concessions. Switzerland, they faced a whopping 39% after talks broke down. Mexico got a bit of breathing room with a 90-day delay. But this isn't isolated to one nation. It's a multi-front battle. Ottawa, that's Canada's capital, folks, is feeling sustained pressure, and over in Beijing, China is playing a smart game that's undercutting US leverage. Trump's tariffs have essentially opened up wars on multiple fronts, and both Canada and China aren't just sitting back. They're responding in ways built to weather the storm, outlasting those short-term shocks. For Canada, energy has always been a huge part of the relationship. For a long time, they were more than happy to pipe their oil south to the US. Nearly all of Canada's oil exports head to its southern neighbor. It doesn't seem super vulnerable because so far, the US hasn't tariffed energy products heavily. As one expert put it, "I think they recognize they need our oil and gas to provide energy security for their country." Under Prime Minister Mark Carney, the former Bank of England governor who's now leading Canada, they've refused to rush into a bad deal. Instead, Canada's reinforcing ties with Mexico, scouting new export destinations, and shielding domestic industries from sudden hits. Their ace in the hole? Energy interdependence. The US relies on millions of barrels of Canadian oil and gas daily for its energy security. If tariffs hit that flow, US consumer prices would spike. Think higher gas at the pump, increased heating bills. Washington knows that's a political nightmare, so they're unlikely to risk it. This mutual dependency lets Canada absorb the tariff punches while quietly building alternatives rather than caving to Trump's timeline. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you're running a household, and your main supplier for essentials suddenly jacks up prices. But you know they need your business just as much, so you start shopping around without cutting ties abruptly. That's Canada right now. They're diversifying, looking to Europe, Asia, maybe even ramping up domestic use. It's a patient strategy, buying time to strengthen their position. Shifting gears to China, the impression is that Trump's leverage there is slimmer. The impression we get certainly is that Trump's leverage with China is much less. Yeah, that's the vibe from analysts. China isn't backing down. They're tightening their hold on critical minerals vital to Western defense companies. A Wall Street Journal report highlighted how Beijing's control over rare earths is delaying production and inflating costs for materials in weapons, jets, and drones. It's a clever pushback, hitting supply chains that US tariffs can't touch directly. China dominates the scene here. They control about 60 to 70% of global rare earth mining and nearly 90% of refining. Since late 2024, they've clamped down on export rules for minerals key to defense manufacturing. We're talking high-temperature magnets for jet engines, specialty alloys, stuff that's irreplaceable in a hurry. This makes it harder and pricier for US contractors to source, slowing down military readiness and hiking budgets. But China's not stopping at minerals. They've pulled off what some call a magic trick in oil independence. Estimates show over a fifth of China's oil imports last year were sanctioned oil, from places like Russia, Iran, and Venezuela, all under US sanctions. On the energy side, China's dismantling a major vulnerability: their reliance on seaborne oil imports through the US-monitored Malacca Strait. Quick geography lesson. The Malacca Strait is a narrow choke point between Malaysia and Indonesia, crucial for oil tankers from the Middle East to Asia. The US Navy keeps a close eye on it. To counter this, Beijing's expanding renewables at a breakneck pace: solar, wind, you name it. They've built the world's largest electric vehicle industry, reducing oil demand for transportation. Plus, they're stockpiling in strategic reserves. This shrinks the leverage US naval power once had. And that sanctioned oil? It's become a resilience tool. In 2024, China imported about 821,000 barrels per day from Russia, 1.4 million from Iran, and 268,000 from Venezuela. Much of this gets processed by smaller teapot refineries, independent outfits not tied to big state companies, then sold as refined products across Asia. This keeps their feedstock costs low, bolsters domestic refining, and blunts US sanctions' impact. It's like finding a backdoor supply that undercuts the pressure. Together, these moves give China breathing room in trade fights. They restrict what America needs, like rare earths, while securing their own must-haves, energy. Trump's goal is straightforward: make resistance more expensive than surrender. But Canada and China are flipping the script with asymmetric responses. Canada leans on its energy supplier role. That daily flow of oil and gas is a lifeline the US can't easily ditch. China makes essential inputs scarcer and cuts exposure to US pressure points, like through energy diversification. Neither is going tit for tat with tariffs. Instead, they're targeting US vulnerabilities that tariffs can't patch. The outcome? Rising costs stateside, from defense materials to industrial parts, with no quick fix. Trump wants fast, flashy wins, deals he can parade as American triumphs. Carney's playbook is defensive patience. Keep talks open, guard Canada's edges, avoid hasty concessions that might unravel soon. Xi Jinping's approach is even slower, reshaping industries and supply chains to toughen China against future clashes. This isn't about headline tariff numbers anymore. It's an endurance contest. Who can adapt under pressure? Canada's energy leverage and diversification, China's mineral control and energy shift, all make US coercion pricier over time. Trump's tariffs have flipped global trade's tone, sparking a pushback that'll test America's multi-front stamina without yielding ground. It's fascinating, right? Like a high-stakes chess game where every move has real-world ripples. Now let's zoom in on that extended truce between China and the US that Trump announced. Well, let's talk about this extended truce between China and the US that was announced by President Trump. I think that President Trump didn't have much of a choice because China is in a very strong position to negotiate. Spot on. China holds strong cards, from rare earths to their massive market. If China's negotiating from power, what about Canada? Early August saw two contrasting tales. In Washington, Trump extended the US-China tariff truce by 90 days. The White House spun it as time to nail down commitments on US chip exports, think Nvidia, and energy sales to China. Beijing, meanwhile, still rules rare earth production and just granted zero-tariff access to dozens of African nations, bolstering their stance. But for Canada, no such relief. Since August 1st, non-USMCA Canadian goods face 35% US tariffs, up from 25% in late July. No reductions in sight, unlike Mexico's delay. One neighbor gets a breather, the other gets squeezed. For Trump, tariffs are negotiating hammers. Justifications shift: border security, fentanyl, dairy, banking, whatever fits. With China, the truce tied to specifics like chips and ethane. Beijing's mineral dominance adds leverage. With Canada, high tariffs pressure ahead of potential USMCA reopenings, limiting Ottawa's options and pushing concessions. Trump's history, EU at 15% caps, Switzerland at 39%, shows he anchors bargaining with these rates. Canada admits we are in a difficult position with the US. We're subject now to a tariff of 35%. We have to put in place a very elaborate plan to diversify our exports. Prime Minister Carney avoids knee-jerk retaliation, mixing dialogue with domestic boosts. In July, Ottawa pledged over $1 billion Canadian for steel, procurement favouring local, worker reskilling, infrastructure to steady supply. Per the Canadian Steel Producers Association, US tariffs since June 4th, up to 50% on steel aluminum, cost 6 to 6.5 million tonnes of market access. The plan opens 2 to 2.5 million tonnes domestically, a pivot from US over-reliance. Europe's a prime target. Europe is an obvious partner. It has a very mature economy. They're interested in all kinds of goods that we can export. But we will also work with new partners or partners that we have not developed a commercial relationship as deep as the US one, including, of course, with Europe and key Asian countries. Canada's deepening EU ties via the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, where most goods are tariff-free. New discussions align strategies in steel, aluminum, critical minerals. The EU's 450 million-strong market offers stability, cutting exposure to US volatility. Trump bets on speed. Tariffs create pain, force quick deals. Carney counters with endurance, bolster industries, diversify, keep diplomacy alive until tides turn. Over 85% of Canada-US exports stay tariff-free under USMCA, including autos and energy. Ottawa's cards, minerals, auto chains, oil, gas are tough to replace. By protecting these and expanding partnerships like EU, Canada aims to outlast Trump's expectations. This fight's beyond rates. It's crafting decade-defining North American trade rules. Canada won't play catch-up. Let's start with Canada's game plan under Prime Minister Mark Carney. They're not just sitting back and taking the hit from these 35% tariffs on non-USMCA goods. No way. Ottawa's playing a long game, and it's all about endurance and smart diversification. The message is clear. It's not tenable to have, 35+% tariffs on an industry like this. It's not tenable to have 50% tariffs on an important sector like steel or aluminum or copper, because the inputs that go into the United States ultimately are then borne and paid for by American businesses, manufacturers, right? Importers. That's a key point. Tariffs might hurt Canadian exporters, but the higher costs boomerang back to US companies and consumers. It's a two-way street. Carney's approach is calculated patience. Instead of firing back with retaliatory tariffs that could escalate things further, Canada's focusing on strengthening its domestic industries and finding new trade partners. Back in July, Ottawa rolled out a hefty package, over $1 billion Canadian to shield the steel sector. This includes rules to prioritise Canadian steel and aluminum in government projects, funding to retrain workers hit by market shifts, and investments to stabilise supply chains. According to the Canadian Steel Producers Association, US tariffs, which hit as high as 50% on steel and aluminum since June 4th, blocked about 6 to 6.5 million tonnes of Canadian steel from the US market. But Canada's counter? Open up 2 to 2.5 million tonnes of domestic opportunities for those producers. It's like saying, okay, US doesn't want our steel, we'll find buyers at home and elsewhere. And where's that, elsewhere? Europe's a big one. Canada's leaning hard into the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, with the European Union, where most goods already trade tariff-free. But they're not stopping there. New talks are zeroing in on aligning industrial strategies. Think steel, aluminum, and critical minerals like lithium and cobalt, which are gold for tech and green energy. The EU's got a massive market, roughly 450 million people, and a stable regulatory setup. That's a lifeline for Canada to reduce its reliance on the US, where tariff swings are becoming unpredictable. They're also eyeing Asia, with agreements like the CPTPP, Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, to open doors to markets like Japan and Australia. It's a clear signal. Canada's not putting all its eggs in the US basket anymore. But it's not just about exports. Canada holds some serious cards in this trade poker game. Over 85% of its exports to the US, think autos, energy and strategic minerals, still move tariff-free under USMCA rules. That's a huge advantage. The US depends on Canada for millions of barrels of oil and gas daily, powering everything from your car to your home heater. Messing with that flow would spike prices for American consumers, and Washington knows that's a political landmine. Plus, Canada's got integrated auto supply chains, parts crossing the border multiple times before a car's finished, and critical minerals the US needs for batteries and defense tech. These aren't easily replaced, giving Canada leverage to stand firm without rushing into a deal that sells them short. Now let's zoom out and look at the US side of things. Trump's tariff strategy is all about speed. Apply pressure, make it hurt, and force quick concessions. He's banking on visible wins, agreements he can wave around as proof of American dominance. But there's a catch, and it's hitting home. Former Canadian Minister of International Trade Mary Neng nailed it when she called these 35% tariffs unsustainable for both sides. Why? Because while they squeeze Canadian exporters, the higher costs ripple through to American manufacturers, importers, and guess who? You, the consumer. Over 90% of Canadian exports to the US are USMCA compliant, meaning they dodge tariffs, especially in autos and energy. But for the rest, those costs get passed down the supply chain. Take a real-world example from CBS Evening News. West Side Kids, a family-run toy store in New York City, shut down after 4 decades. Why? About 90% of their products came from China, and when new US tariffs hit Chinese imports this summer, the store couldn't absorb the extra costs. Add in competition from online giants and a drop in consumer spending as prices rose, and they were done. This isn't just one store's story, it's happening nationwide. Small businesses without the buying power or storage capacity of big retailers get crushed fast by tariff-driven price hikes. The Yale Budget Lab estimates these 2025 tariff measures will cost American households an extra $2,200 to $3,800 a year. That's real money, hitting lower-income families the hardest. Meanwhile, back in Canada, provincial leaders are stepping up. Ontario Premier Doug Ford isn't waiting for Ottawa to fix everything. He's launched a $1 billion emergency loan program under the Protecting Ontario Fund, targeting businesses in steel, aluminum and auto manufacturing slammed by US tariffs. To qualify, companies need at least 10 employees, $2 million in annual revenue, and must have tapped federal tariff support programs. Loans range from $250,000 to $40 million, repayable within 6 years. The goal, keep payrolls running, facilities open, and prevent layoffs. Ford's also pushing tax cuts, GST reductions, and pressuring the Bank of Canada to lower interest rates to keep Ontario's industrial base humming. It's a proactive defense, not just hoping for US mercy. This brings us to a broader point. This trade clash is a test of endurance. Trump's betting that high tariffs will force Canada to the table with concessions. But Canada, under Carney and with leaders like Ford, is countering with targeted support, active diplomacy, and a refusal to settle for a bad deal. They're signaling they can handle the short-term pain to secure long-term gains. In the US, though, the fallout's visible. Small businesses closing, consumers facing higher prices. It raises the question, can Trump's tariff strategy deliver results before the domestic costs get too steep? Let's circle back to China for a moment, because they're playing a different but parallel game. While Canada leans on energy and diversification, China's tightening its grip on critical minerals and reducing its own vulnerabilities. They control 60 to 70% of global rare earth mining and nearly 90% of refining, stuff that's crucial for everything from fighter jets to electric car batteries. Since late 2024, Beijing's tightened export rules, making it tougher for US defense contractors to get these materials. That delays production and jacks up costs, hitting a sector tariffs can't easily shield. On energy, China's been strategic too. They've cut reliance on seaborne oil imports through the Malacca Strait by boosting renewables, building the world's largest EV industry, and stockpiling reserves. Plus, they're buying sanctioned oil, 821,000 barrels a day from Russia, 1.4 million from Iran, 268,000 from Venezuela in 2024. This keeps their costs low and weakens US sanctions. It's a masterclass in resilience, ensuring China can maneuver in trade talks without buckling under pressure. Both Canada and China are dodging the tariff-for-tariff trap. Instead, they're hitting US weak spots. Canada with energy and supply chain integration, China with minerals and energy independence. The result? Rising costs in the US, from defense to everyday goods with no quick fix. Trump's chasing fast wins, but Carney and Xi Jinping are playing the long game, reshaping their economies to outlast the pressure. This isn't just about trade rates or exemptions. It's about who sets the rules for North America and beyond for the next decade. Canada's holding ground, protecting its industries and building new partnerships. The US is feeling the pinch, from shuttered stores to pricier groceries, and China's rewriting the playbook on global supply chains. We've talked about the big strategies: Trump's tariff hammer, Canada's patient diversification, China's mineral and energy plays. But what does this mean for people on the ground? In early August 2025, the signs of this trade clash are everywhere. In Windsor, Canada, auto workers are holding their breath. This city, just across the border from Detroit, is a hub for car manufacturing, with plants like Stellantis and Ford churning out vehicles that rely on seamless US-Canada supply chains. Tariffs, especially the 35% on non-USMCA goods and up to 50% on steel and aluminum, are threatening jobs. If US demand for Canadian-made parts drops, these workers face layoffs or reduced hours. It's not just numbers, it's families wondering if they can pay their bills. Over in the US, the pain's hitting too. Take New York City, where West Side Kids, a family-run toy store, closed after over 40 years. Why? Tariffs on Chinese imports, 90% of their stock, jacked up costs they couldn't absorb. Add in online competition and consumers tightening their wallets as prices rise, and they were done. This isn't just one shop. Small businesses across the US are feeling the squeeze. The Yale Budget Lab projects these 2025 tariffs will cost American households $2,200 to $3,800 extra per year. That's gas, groceries, clothes, everything getting pricier, hitting lower-income families hardest. It's the kind of thing that makes you rethink that extra coffee run. Former Canadian Minister of International Trade Mary Ng summed it up. These 35% tariffs are unsustainable for both sides. Canadian exporters take a hit, sure, but American manufacturers, importers and consumers foot the bill. Over 90% of Canada's US exports, autos, energy, critical minerals, stay tariff-free under USMCA, keeping the supply chain humming for now. But the non-compliant stuff? That's where the pain's felt, and it ripples. Ng's point is clear. Canada wants a good deal, not a rushed one. They're not folding under pressure. Let's talk Ontario, where Premier Doug Ford's stepping up big time. His $1 billion Protecting Ontario Fund is a lifeline for businesses in steel, aluminum, and autos hit by US tariffs. Companies with at least 10 employees and $2 million in revenue who've tapped federal support can get loans from $250,000 to $40 million, repayable in 6 years. The goal? Keep factories open, workers paid, and supply chains intact. Ford's also pushing tax cuts, GST relief, and lobbying the Bank of Canada for lower interest rates to ease the strain. It's a bold move to shield Ontario's industrial heartland, home to major automakers like GM and Honda. Ford's not waiting for Trump to blink, he's building a fortress to weather the storm. This trade fight's not just about numbers, it's a test of who can endure. Trump's strategy is speed. Slap on tariffs, create pain, extract deals fast. On his 200th day in office, he hit dozens of countries with new tariffs, from Canada's 35% to Switzerland's 39%. CBS News polls show Americans think the economy's doing okay, but most expect prices to keep climbing. That's the gamble. Can Trump score wins before voters feel the pinch too hard? The USMCA is up for review soon, and keeping Canada under pressure might force concessions if Ottawa feels the heat long enough. But Canada's not playing that game. Prime Minister Mark Carney's approach is endurance. Protect key sectors, diversify markets, keep talks open. Canada's leaning on its energy leverage. Millions of barrels of oil and gas flow to the US daily, powering homes and industries. Tariffs on that would spike US prices, a risk Washington's unlikely to take. Canada's also got integrated auto supply chains and critical minerals for batteries and defense tech, stuff the US can't easily source elsewhere. Over 85% of Canada-US trade is USMCA compliant, giving Ottawa breathing room to build ties with Europe and Asia. Speaking of Europe, Canada's doubling down on the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA. Most goods already trade tariff-free, but new talks are aligning strategies in steel, aluminum and minerals. The EU's 450 million strong market is a stable alternative to US tariff swings. Canada's also tapping the CPTPP for access to Japan, Australia and others. It's like rewiring their trade network to be less US dependent, a slow but steady shift. China's in a similar mindset, just with different tools. They're not matching tariffs blow for blow. Instead, they're tightening control over rare earths, 60 to 70% of global mining, 90% of refining. Since late 2024, export restrictions have hiked costs and delayed production for US defense contractors needing magnets for jets or alloys for drones. It's a surgical strike, hitting where tariffs can't protect. On energy, China's cut reliance on the Malacca Strait by boosting renewables, scaling up electric vehicles and stockpiling oil. They're also buying sanctioned oil, 821,000 barrels daily from Russia, 1.4 million from Iran, 268,000 from Venezuela in 2024. This keeps costs low and undercuts US sanctions, letting China maneuver in trade talks with less fear of chokeholds. Both Canada and China are dodging direct tariff fights, targeting US vulnerabilities instead. Canada's energy and supply chain integration make it indispensable. China's mineral dominance and energy resilience give it leverage. The result? Rising US costs, defense budgets ballooning, consumer prices climbing with no quick fix. Trump wants fast, splashy deals to show American strength. Carney and Xi Jinping are betting on resilience, reshaping their economies to outlast the pressure. Let's zoom out to the bigger picture. This isn't just a trade spat. It's about who writes the rules for global trade in the next decade. Trump's tariffs have reset the tone, but they've sparked a pushback that's testing America's stamina. Canada's holding ground, though, protecting workers and building new markets. China's rewiring supply chains to be tariff-proof. The US, meanwhile, faces shuttered businesses and pricier goods, with small retailers and low-income families bearing the brunt. What's next? The USMCA review looms, and Trump might push for an early reopening to tighten the screws on Canada. But Ottawa's ready to negotiate from strength, not desperation. China's truce, extended for 90 days in August, buys time for deals on US chips and energy, but their rare earth grip and African trade pacts keep them in the driver's seat. The human cost is mounting. Windsor workers, US shop owners, families pinching pennies. This clash will shape economies, jobs and prices for years. So what do you think? Are tariffs the right move or are they backfiring? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let me know if you want more on trade or another topic. Thanks for sticking with me through this series. Hit like, subscribe and share to keep the convo going. See you next time.